Close your eyes and let yourself drift into one of the darkest corners of Pokémon fandom, where childhood memories twist into something unsettling. We're about to explore a theory so haunting that it transformed an innocent adventure about catching pocket monsters into a psychological nightmare that has lingered in the minds of fans for over 2 decades. This is the story of Ash's Coma Theory, a creepypasta that refuses to die, even though the evidence crumbles under the slightest scrutiny. The theory begins where every Pokémon journey starts, April 1st, 1997, when the very first episode of the Pokémon anime aired in Japan. The episode, titled Pokémon I Choose You, introduced the world to Ash Ketchum, a clumsy 10-year-old boy from Pallet Town who overslept on the most important day of his life. By the time he stumbled into Professor Oak's laboratory in his pajamas, the 3 starter Pokémon had already been claimed by other trainers, including his arrogant childhood rival Gary. Ash was left with the only remaining option, a stubborn electric-type mouse named Pikachu who wanted absolutely nothing to do with him. From the moment they met, their relationship was rocky. Pikachu refused to go inside its Pokeball, forcing Ash to drag the reluctant creature along with a rope like a leash. The yellow mouse would shock him repeatedly throughout that first morning, leaving Ash singed and frustrated. When Ash spotted a Pidgey and attempted his first capture, Pikachu deliberately sabotaged the effort by scaring away the bird. But everything changed when Ash, in a moment of poor judgment, threw a rock at what he thought was another Pidgey. It wasn't. The rock struck a Spearow, one of the most aggressive bird Pokémon in the Kanto region, and suddenly, Ash and Pikachu found themselves being chased by an entire flock of furious Spearow. Desperate and terrified, Ash encountered a red-haired girl fishing by a river. Her name was Misty, though Ash didn't have time for proper introductions. He grabbed her bicycle without permission and pedaled frantically toward Viridian City, where the nearest Pokémon Center could heal Pikachu's injuries. The Spearow flock pursued them relentlessly through the forest. Rain began to fall, turning the dirt path into slick mud. Ash lost control of the bicycle and crashed hard into the ground. Lying there in the mud, bruised and exhausted, with angry Spearow circling overhead, Ash made a choice. He stood up and told Pikachu to get inside its Pokeball to stay safe. Then he faced the flock alone, arms spread wide, offering himself as a target to protect his Pokémon partner. Pikachu, moved by this act of selfless courage, leaped from Ash's shoulder into the air. At that exact moment, a bolt of natural lightning struck from the storm clouds above. The lightning channeled through Pikachu's body, amplifying its electric attack into a massive thundershock that erupted across the field like an explosion of pure voltage. The attack destroyed Misty's bicycle completely, leaving it a smoking ruin. It knocked Ash backward to the ground. The Spearow flock scattered, and when the storm cleared moments later, both Ash and Pikachu lay unconscious near the charred remains of the bicycle. According to the Coma Theory, Ash never woke up. Everything that happened after that moment, every adventure across every region, every Pokémon caught, every gym badge earned, every friend made, has been nothing but an elaborate dream manufactured by Ash's comatose mind. The theory suggests that either the bike crash caused severe head trauma or the lightning strike fried his brain, leaving him in a vegetative state in some hospital in Kanto. Days passed before someone found him lying in that field. He was rushed to a medical facility and placed on life support, pumped full of medications to stabilize his condition. The drugs, according to the theory, transformed. This theory didn't originate from any official source. It emerged from the depths of internet creepypasta culture, appearing on forums and fan theory websites sometime in the late 2000s. The earliest versions appeared on sites like Creepypasta Wiki and various Pokémon fan forums, where anonymous users would post elaborate explanations for why the theory made perfect sense. These posts would spread across the internet, copied and pasted onto new forums, shared on social media, and eventually featured in YouTube videos that dissected every piece of supposed evidence. The theory became so widespread that even people who had never watched the anime beyond the first few episodes knew about it. It became one of those cultural touchstones of Pokémon fandom, right alongside the myth about a truck hiding Mew, or the urban legend about Lavender Town's supposedly cursed music causing illness in children. The theory gained traction because it seemed to offer a convenient explanation for one of the anime's most glaring inconsistencies: Ash never ages. From that first episode in 1997 through more than 2 decades of continuous adventures, Ash has remained perpetually 10 years old. He's traveled through 8 different regions, met hundreds of trainers, participated in countless battles, witnessed legendary Pokémon, saved the world multiple times, and yet he hasn't grown a single centimeter or aged a single day. Official statements from the Pokémon Company have confirmed this, stating explicitly that Ash is still 10 years old. Former director and storyboard artist Masamitsu Hidaka stated in a 2008 interview that Ash and his companions would remain their respective ages for as long as the show continues, regardless of how many years pass in the real world. It's a deliberate creative choice, but the Coma Theory offered fans a darker, more narratively satisfying explanation for this eternal youth. According to the Coma Theory, which is entirely fan speculation, Ash doesn't age because his consciousness is supposedly trapped in a dream state where time doesn't function normally. Coma patients often experience time dilation, where months in the real world might feel like days or even hours in their unconscious perception. The theory suggests that all of Ash's adventures, which seem to span years within the show's narrative, are actually just fragmented dream sequences occurring over a much shorter period in reality. His brain, desperate to make sense of its situation, constructs elaborate fantasies based on his last conscious memories, his desire to be a Pokémon trainer, his knowledge of the Pokémon world from Professor Oak's lessons, and his final moments before the accident. The theory attempts to explain other recurring oddities in the anime through this dark lens. Every town Ash visits has a Nurse Joy who looks identical to every other Nurse Joy, and every police station is staffed by an Officer Jenny who could be the clone of every other Officer Jenny. In the show, these similarities are explained away with a throwaway line about them all being part of large families where everyone looks alike, but the Coma Theory offers a darker interpretation. These repeated characters, according to the theory, are actually the same nurse and the same police officer who appear in Ash's real hospital. His comatose brain, unable to create entirely new faces from scratch, simply recycles the faces of the medical staff who care for his physical body. Nurse Joy represents the kind nurse who checks his vitals and adjusts his IV drip. Officer Jenny represents Team Rocket, the bumbling trio of Jesse, James, and Meowth, who chase Ash across multiple regions in a never-ending quest to steal his Pikachu, undergo a noticeable tonal shift after the first season. In the earliest episodes, Team Rocket was portrayed as genuinely threatening. They stole Pokémon, operated criminal enterprises, and seemed like actual villains. But as the series progressed, they became increasingly comedic, almost slapstick in their incompetence. They would show up in ridiculous disguises that somehow fooled everyone, attempt absurdly overcomplicated schemes to catch one single Pikachu, and inevitably blast off into the sky after each defeat while shouting their catchphrase. The Coma Theory explains this shift by suggesting that the medications pumped into Ash's body gradually took effect, stabilizing his coma dreams. What began as frightening nightmares featuring dangerous criminals slowly transformed into harmless, comical encounters as the drugs smoothed out the rough edges of his unconscious fantasies. But the theory goes deeper than just explaining visual repetitions and tonal shifts. It attempts to assign symbolic meaning to every major character in Ash's journey, transforming them into psychological manifestations of his inner psyche. Misty, the red-haired water Pokémon trainer who traveled with Ash throughout the Kanto and Johto regions, represents Ash's first crush, a romanticized ideal of femininity from the perspective of a 10-year-old boy. She's feisty, strong-willed, and often yells at him, but there's an underlying affection that Ash's subconscious picks up on. The theory suggests that Misty might be based on a real girl Ash knew before the accident, someone he had childish feelings for, but never had the courage to express. Brock, the rock-type gym leader turned traveling companion who constantly falls head over heels for every attractive woman he encounters, supposedly represents Ash's confused understanding of adult sexuality and romance. As a 10-year-old, Ash wouldn't fully comprehend sexual attraction or romantic relationships, so his mind creates Brock as a proxy to explore these concepts safely. Brock's endless, unsuccessful attempts to woo women reflect Ash's own uncertainty about these grown-up matters. The fact that Brock never actually succeeds in any of his romantic pursuits mirrors Ash's incomplete understanding of how relationships work. Gary Oak, Ash's childhood rival who always stays one step ahead, represents Ash's insecurities and self-doubt. Gary is everything Ash wanted to be: confident, successful, popular, and talented. He arrived at Professor Oak's laboratory on time, got one of the good starter Pokémon, and immediately set off on his journey with a group of cheerleaders supporting him. Throughout the Kanto region, Gary constantly reminds Ash of how many more badges he has, how many more Pokémon he's caught, essentially serving as a walking embodiment of Ash's fears that he's not good enough. Later, when Gary gives up battling to become a Pokémon researcher like his grandfather, the theory suggests this represents Ash's comatose mind finally coming to terms with his competitive anxieties, transforming that negative energy into something more positive and productive. Giovanni, the leader of Team Rocket and one of the main antagonists, is theorized to represent Ash's absent father. Throughout the anime, Ash's father is never shown or even mentioned beyond vague references. Ash Ketchum, Ash's mother, appears to be raising him alone in Pallet Town. The Coma Theory suggests that Giovanni's villainy reflects Ash's resentment toward his father for never being there. The theory also extends its symbolic interpretation to Ash's Pokémon. Pikachu, his first and most loyal companion, might represent Ash's humanity and his will to survive. The fact that Pikachu refuses to evolve into Raichu, despite evolution being a natural part of Pokémon development, could symbolize Ash's refusal to grow up, his desire to remain in this childlike dream state forever, at least according to those who believe the theory. Every time Ash releases a Pokémon, the theory suggests this might represent Ash's comatose mind, forcing him to let go of solved psychological issues. Once he's worked through a particular emotional problem or mental barrier, the Pokémon representing that issue is removed from his active team, stored away in the recesses of his unconscious. The theory even reinterprets the first Pokémon movie, Mewtwo Strikes Back, through this dark lens. In the film, Mewtwo, a psychic Pokémon created through genetic engineering, questions its purpose and existence before deciding to eliminate all Pokémon and their trainers to prove that cloned Pokémon are superior to natural ones. Ash famously turns to stone trying to stop the conflict between Mewtwo and Mew, and only the tears of all the Pokémon present bring him back to life. According to proponents of the Coma Theory, Mewtwo could represent a new, aggressive form of medical treatment designed to shock Ash out of his coma. The electrical impulses and experimental procedures are interpreted by his dreaming mind as this powerful, threatening creature. The clones that Mewtwo creates to fight the original Pokémon represent the medical interventions breaking down Ash's mental defenses, the psychological barriers keeping him safely asleep. When Ash turns to stone in the film, it symbolizes his mind shutting down completely under the assault of this treatment. The tears that revive him represent the real-world success of the procedure, bringing him back from the brink but not quite waking him fully. The Coma Theory attempts to explain why Ash seems to forget so much between regions. When he travels to a new area like Hoenn, Sinnoh, Unova, or Kalos, he often displays surprising ignorance about Pokémon that should be common knowledge, asking his Pokédex about species he's encountered before in previous regions. He meets trainers and acts as if certain battle strategies are completely new to him, despite having used similar tactics seasons earlier. He even leaves behind most of his Pokémon team, traveling with just Pikachu and a fresh set of companions. The theory interprets this as a form of anterograde amnesia, a symptom sometimes associated with brain injuries where new memories fail to form properly. Each region represents a new dream cycle, where Ash's deteriorating brain struggles to maintain continuity, forcing him to essentially restart his journey over and over, because his mind can't hold on to the progress he's made. Team Rocket's persistent appearances across all these regions, despite being utterly incompetent villains, supposedly represents the medical staff constantly trying to wake Ash up. Their disguises that somehow fool everyone reflect Ash's barely conscious awareness that something is wrong, that these recurring figures aren't quite real. He knows on some level that Jesse and James in their absurd costumes aren't actually the characters they're pretending to be, but he plays along because acknowledging the truth would mean confronting his comatose state. The fact that they blast off after every encounter, flying high into the sky and disappear. Some versions of the theory focus heavily on Pikachu's behavior as supposed evidence. They point out that in the show's lore, electric-type Pokémon naturally grow stronger as they age and train, yet Ash's Pikachu exhibits wildly inconsistent power levels throughout the series. In some episodes, Pikachu defeats legendarily powerful Pokémon with ease. In others, it loses to rookie trainers, newly caught Pokémon. This inconsistency, believers claim, could represent Pikachu as Ash's life support system. When Pikachu appears strong, proponents say, Ash's vital signs are stable. When Pikachu seems weak or is unable to battle, it might reflect deteriorating health in the real world. The fact that Pikachu adamantly refuses to enter its Pokeball, staying outside by Ash's side at all times, could symbolize the need for continuous electrical monitoring, the medical equipment that must remain connected to Ash's body at all hours to keep him alive, if you believe this interpretation. Pikachu is the defibrillator, the EKG machine, the life support keeping that fragile thread of consciousness from snapping completely. Variations of the theory emerged over the years, each adding their own dark twists. One popular alternative to the Coma Theory suggests that Ash didn't fall into a coma from the Spearow attack, but instead died in episode 23, The Tower of Terror. In that episode, Ash visits a haunted tower in Lavender Town in search of ghost-type Pokémon. A chandelier falls on both Ash and Pikachu, knocking them unconscious, and a haunter pulls their spirits from their bodies for some ghostly adventures. By the episode's end, their spirits return to their bodies and they wake up seemingly fine. But this variation of the theory proposes they never actually came back fully, that somehow their spirits remained partially separated, which could explain why Ash interacts so easily with ghost-type Pokémon throughout the series. This would explain why Ash interacts so easily with ghost-type Pokémon throughout the series, why he seems to have unusual encounters with spectral beings that normal humans don't experience. He's dead, operating on the same spiritual frequency as ghost Pokémon, unable to move on from the mortal world because he has unfinished business, his dream of becoming a Pokémon master. Another variation, slightly less dark but still melancholy, suggests that the Ho-Oh Ash sees at the end of the first episode might be responsible for his eternal youth. According to Pokédex entries in later generations, those fortunate enough to witness Ho-Oh are granted eternal happiness. This interpretation proposes that when Ash saw the legendary rainbow Pokémon flying overhead just after the Spearow incident, Ho-Oh might have granted him a wish, either consciously or subconsciously. Based on what we know from the show, Ash could have wished that his Pokémon journey would never end, that he could remain young and free to adventure forever without the responsibilities and pains of growing up. Ho-Oh obliged, freezing Ash at 10 years old, ensuring his dream of endless adventure would continue indefinitely. This version is gentler than the Coma interpretation, suggesting that Ash's perpetual youth is a gift rather than a tragedy, but it still carries an underlying sadness. After all, eternal childhood means eternal immaturity. Yet another theory emerged from the Mewtwo movie, specifically the scene where Ash is turned to stone. Some fans proposed that when the Pokemon's tears revived him, they didn't quite bring him back correctly in some metaphysical way. His body resumed functioning, this interpretation suggests, but the process of death and resurrection somehow made him ageless, freezing him at that moment of rebirth. He became a being stuck between life and death, functionally immortal but unable to progress beyond that fixed point in time. This would explain not only his lack of aging, but also his seemingly supernatural resilience. Throughout the series, Ash endures attacks that should hospitalize or kill a normal human child. He's been electrocuted by Pikachu hundreds of times, with no lasting damage. He's been caught in explosions, fallen from great heights, been frozen solid, burned, and subjected to psychic assaults. Yet he always bounces back with little more than some soot on his face or torn clothing. A normal human body shouldn't be that durable, but a body caught in a state of suspended animation between life and death might possess unusual properties. The psychological appeal of these dark theories becomes clear when you consider the audience. The Pokémon anime has been running for over 25 years. Many of the people who watched that first episode in 1997, or its English dub in 1998, are now adults in their 30s and 40s. They grew up while Ash stayed 10. For someone who watched Pokémon as a child and continued following the series into adulthood, there's something unsettling about that eternal stasis. These dark theories emerged partly as a way for adult fans to reconcile their own aging with Ash's unchanging youth. By reinterpreting the show as a tragedy, as a cautionary tale, or a psychological horror story, these fans could engage with Pokémon content in a more mature way, finding depth and darkness in what is ostensibly a children's program about colorful creatures battling each other. But here's where the entire Coma Theory falls apart. It makes absolutely no sense when you examine it with any level of critical thinking. The theory crumbles under even the most basic logical scrutiny, and the evidence it presents falls apart the moment you examine it closely. Let's start with the most obvious problem. The theory claims that everything after the Spearow attack is Ash's unconscious mind fulfilling his desires and fantasies. According to the original creepypasta, Ash is living out his dream of becoming a Pokémon master in this coma-induced fantasy world. But if that's true, why doesn't he succeed? Why doesn't his unconscious mind grant him the victories he so desperately wants? Before the supposed coma, Ash stated his goal clearly: to become a Pokémon master by catching all 151 Pokémon known at the time and winning the Pokémon League. After the theoretical coma begins, Ash fails spectacularly at both objectives. He never catches them all. Throughout the entire anime's run across multiple regions and generations, Ash has caught approximately 90 Pokémon total out of the now over 1,000 Pokémon species that exist. That's less than 9%. For someone supposedly living out his ultimate fantasy in a dream world, he's doing a remarkably poor job of achieving his stated goals. If this is his dream, why isn't he the greatest Pokémon trainer who ever lived? Why doesn't his end the league victories? The theory gets even more ridiculous. Ash has competed in every major regional Pokémon League tournament throughout the series. He's fought through the Indigo League in Kanto, the Silver Conference in Johto, the Evergrande Conference in Hoenn, the Lily of the Valley Conference in Sinnoh, the Virtus Conference in Unova, and the Lumiose Conference in Kalos. He finally won the Alola League much later in the series, but that wasn't until after 2 decades of repeated failures. If his comatose brain is manufacturing these experiences, why does it make him lose over and over again? Why would his unconscious mind torture him with constant near victories and heartbreaking defeats? The entire premise of the theory depends on the coma providing Ash with wish fulfillment, but the actual content of the show directly contradicts that idea. He doesn't get what he wants. He struggles, fails, learns lessons, and tries again, which is exactly how a normal adventure story works, not how a wish fulfillment fantasy should function. The theory's explanation for Nurse Joy and Officer Jenny is also absurdly flimsy. The idea that Ash's brain can only recycle the faces of his real-world hospital staff doesn't hold up when you consider how many other characters appear in the show. Ash meets hundreds of different trainers, each with unique designs, personalities, and appearances. He encounters gym leaders with wildly different looks, from the rock-themed Brock to the psychic-themed Sabrina to the dragon-themed Claire. He befriends professors, coordinators, rivals, and random townspeople, all of whom look completely different from each other. If his comatose brain is capable of generating that level of visual variety, why would it suddenly fail when it comes to nurses and police officers? The in-universe explanation that they're all part of large families where everyone looks similar makes far more sense than the convoluted coma interpretation, especially in a world where Pokémon exist. If you can accept the existence of fire-breathing dragons and psychic monsters that can bend spoons with their minds, accepting that some families have strong genetic similarities is hardly a stretch. The characterization of Team Rocket as representing failed medical interventions is perhaps the theory's most absurd claim. Jessie, James, and Meowth are consistent characters with their own backstories, motivations, and character development. They're not faceless antagonists. They have dreams, fears, and surprisingly emotional moments where they reveal their vulnerabilities. Jessie wants to be a successful performer and constantly grapples with her impoverished childhood. James struggles with his wealthy but oppressive family. Meowth learned to walk and talk like a human to impress another Meowth who rejected him anyway, leaving him belonging to neither human nor Pokémon society. These are fully realized characters with arcs that span the entire series. Reducing them to symbols of medical staff trying to wake a coma patient strips away everything interesting about them and replaces it with a shallow metaphor that doesn't even make sense within the theory's own logic. Furthermore, the whole concept of how comas work in the theory is medically nonsensical. Coma patients don't experience elaborate, coherent, multi-year narrative dreams while unconscious. Real comas don't function like that. People in vegetative states don't have adventures inside their heads. Their brain activity is severely limited, certainly not capable of generating the complex storylines, character development, and plot twists that make up decades of Pokémon episodes. The theory borrows its understanding of comas from the theory's claim that Ash would suffer brain damage if he realized he was in a coma is equally absurd. That's not how lucid dreaming works, and it's certainly not how comas work. People who become aware they're dreaming don't suddenly suffer brain trauma from the revelation. There's an entire field of study around lucid dreaming, where practitioners deliberately train themselves to recognize when they're asleep so they can control their dreams. None of them have experienced brain damage as a result. The idea that recognizing a false reality would cause neurological harm is pure fantasy with no basis in medical fact. The real explanation for Ash's eternal youth is far more mundane but also far more sensible. It's a children's cartoon that maintains consistency with its target audience. The Pokémon Company has stated this explicitly multiple times in official communications. In a 2003 post on the official Pokémon website, a site editor confirmed that Ash is ageless because he's an icon and a legend, like Mickey Mouse. Mickey Mouse has been around since 1928 and hasn't aged a day. Bugs Bunny is over 80 years old and still looks exactly the same. Charlie Brown never graduated elementary school, despite his comic strip running for 50 years. These characters exist in what's called comic book time, a storytelling convention where characters don't age despite the passage of real-world time, because aging them would fundamentally change the nature of the story being told. Pokémon is a franchise aimed primarily at children between the ages of 6 and 12. Having a 10-year-old protagonist allows that age group to identify with the main character, to see themselves in Ash's adventures. If Ash aged in real time, he would now be in his 30s, far too old for the show's target audience to relate to. The creative decision to keep him 10 ensures that every new generation of children can watch Pokémon and feel like the story is about someone their age going on an adventure. It's not a profound mystery requiring elaborate dark theories. It's a practical marketing decision designed to keep the franchise accessible and relatable to its intended audience. The anime even lampshades this occasionally. Characters will reference having known each other for a long time or mention that certain events happened years ago, but they never actually age. Time passes in a vague, non-specific way. Seasons change, holidays occur, but everyone stays the same age. This is comic book time in action, the same narrative device used by countless long-running animated series. The Simpsons has been on the air since 1989, and Bart Simpson is still in 4th grade. South Park's main characters have remained in elementary school for over 2 decades. Adventure Time's Finn aged slightly over its run, but even that aging was minimal compared to how much time passed in the show's chronology. These aren't mysteries. They're conventions of the medium. The idea that every character would need to represent some aspect of Ash's psyche is also unnecessary. Misty isn't a symbol of his romantic confusion. She's a traveling companion who serves as a counterbalance to Ash's impulsive nature, someone who calls him out when he's being reckless. Brock isn't a representation of sexuality. He is comic relief whose running gag involves falling for pretty women, a common trope in anime and manga aimed at young audiences. Gary isn't Ash's insecurities made manifest. He's a rival character, a narrative device used in countless adventure stories to give the protagonist someone to measure himself against and push him to improve. These characters exist because stories need supporting casts. not everything requires deep psychological analysis. The theory's popularity says more about internet culture than it does about Pokémon itself. Creepypastas thrive on taking innocent, beloved children's media and reinterpreting them through a dark lens. There are similar theories about other kids' shows. Rugrats has a theory that all the babies are dead or imaginary. The Fairly Odd Parents has a theory that Timmy is actually in a mental institution. SpongeBob SquarePants has multiple dark theories about nuclear testing and post-apocalyptic mutations. These theories proliferate because they offer a transgressive thrill, the excitement of seeing something wholesome revealed to be secretly horrifying. They let people engage with children's media in a way, and that's perhaps the most important thing to understand about Ash's Coma Theory and others like it. They exist not because the evidence supports them, but because people enjoy believing them. They're fun to think about, fun to discuss, fun to use as a lens for rewatching old episodes and finding clues that support the interpretation. But fun doesn't equal truth, and popularity doesn't equal validity. The theory has been thoroughly debunked by logic, by medical accuracy, by the actual content of the show, and by official statements from the creators. Ash isn't in a coma. He's not dead, he's not frozen in time by Ho-Oh's blessing, he's simply a cartoon character in a long-running series that uses comic book time to maintain narrative consistency. The Pokémon anime recently made a significant change that further undermines the Coma Theory. After 25 years, Ash Ketchum is no longer the main character. The new series, Pokémon Horizons, follows two new protagonists named Lyco and Roy. If Ash's story was always meant to be about a coma patient trapped in an eternal dream, you'd think that revelation would come before his removal from the series. You'd expect some kind of resolution, some hint that the dark interpretation was correct all along. Instead, his story simply concluded. He had adventures, made friends, caught Pokémon, and eventually his narrative arc reached its natural end. The series moved on to new characters, without any suggestion that Ash's journey was anything other than what it appeared to be on the surface. When Lyco, the new protagonist, had an accident in her first episode, falling from a great height only to land safely on a sleeping Snorlax, fans immediately created a Lyco's Coma Theory as a joke, a tongue-in-cheek reference to the old Ash theory. The fact that the fanbase treats it as a meme rather than a serious interpretation shows how the original theory has evolved in collective consciousness. It's become a running joke, a piece of fandom history that people reference with a knowing wink rather than genuine belief. Even those who enjoyed the theory in its heyday recognize it for what it always was, a creative reinterpretation rather than a hidden truth. So where does that leave us? The Coma Theory persists not because it's true, but because it's memorable. It's one of those ideas that sticks in your mind precisely because it's so dark and so at odds with the cheerful surface of the Pokémon franchise. It serves as a reminder of how powerfully our imaginations can transform the stories we consume, finding shadows where none were intended. The theory is debunked, illogical, and contradicted by both the show's content and official statements. But it remains a fascinating piece of fan culture, a testament to how deeply people can engage with the media they love. Ash Ketchum's journey was never about escaping a coma. It was about friendship, perseverance, and the joy of discovery. It was about a boy and his Pikachu traveling the world, meeting new people in Pokémon, learning valuable lessons, and growing as a person, even if his physical age never changed. The real story is infinitely more wholesome than any dark theory could ever make it. And perhaps that's what we should hold on to. Sometimes, a children's cartoon is exactly what it appears to be, a simple, heartfelt story meant to inspire wonder in young viewers. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's no need to search for hidden darkness in something that was only ever meant to bring light. If you enjoyed this exploration of one of Pokémon's darkest theories, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into gaming lore, obscure trivia, and the fascinating corners of fan culture. Until next time, sleep well, and remember that sometimes the simplest explanation is the correct one.